In this video, we introduce the Koine Greek subjunctive mood. We're first going to talk about subjunctive basics, then we're going to talk about how the subjunctive is formed. We'll look at some of the subjunctive paradigms. At that point, we will do a quick quiz to review some of the information about the basics of the subjunctive and the forms of the subjunctive. And then after the quick quiz, we're going to move into the functions of the subjunctive. We're going to see that there are 7 different ways that the subjunctive commonly functions in Koine Greek. And I'm going to give you a little chart for translating these different functions of the subjunctive. And we're going to conclude the video with a little bit of practice identifying the different functions of the subjunctive from Greek sentences. So let's go ahead and get started with subjunctive basics here. We've talked about a couple of different moods so far. We spent a good portion of the first part of the course in the indicative mood, a mood that we know very well. We have a lot of forms of the indicative mood. And remember that the indicative mood indicates something. That's where it gets its name from. It indicates something that is or something that will be in the future. It's sort of the mood of factuality. We're going to introduce later on the imperative mood, which is the mood of command. It's when you want to tell someone to do something, you would use the imperative mood in Greek. We also have the infinitive mood, which we have already introduced. And remember, the infinitive mood is a verbal noun that is not bound by person or number. So that when you're parsing an infinitive in Greek, you don't give person or number information because the infinitive refers to the whole expansive idea of the verb. The subjunctive mood is a mood of contingency, possibility, or unreality. The action may or may not happen in the future. It's not certain that it will happen. And in this way, the subjunctive mood is a future-oriented mood. And in English, we normally translate the subjunctive mood from Koine Greek with our English future tense. So this is one of the most common ways you're going to be translating the subjunctive is with the English future verb will. So we'll also often see that because the subjunctive is the so-called mood of contingency, that it is used with a particular particle, namely the particle on, alpha nu, which sort of generally translates to the English ever that's added to the end of a relative pronoun. So whichever, whoever, whatever. And this word will be stuck into a subjunctive clause to add that sense of sort of indefiniteness or contingency. And one of the most important things for you to take away from this lecture, and one of the most important things for you to know about the subjunctive, is how to recognize the subjunctive. And the main way that you're going to be able to recognize the subjunctive is with a lengthened connecting vowel. So remember, normally in indicative verbs, our connecting vowels are omicron or epsilon. Notice here that our connecting vowels for the subjunctive mood are the long forms of these. Omicron, O small, goes to omega, O big, and epsilon goes to the long vowel eta. So this is going to be your key to being able to recognize a subjunctive verb in a sentence. And then lastly here on this slide, we have the fact that the subjunctive occurs in 2 tenses, in the present tense and the aorist tense. And as is the case in most non-indicative moods, the tense does not necessarily refer to time. Remember, for the subjunctive, we're normally going to be having some sort of future or potential action. So the tense of a subjunctive verb is not going to refer to necessarily when it happens, but the kind of action that is referred to. So the present tense is going to be ongoing action. Remember, we often have depicted the present tense like this. The action is ongoing before the writer's or the speaker's eyes. It's happening over a period of time. So our imperfect indicative, he was loosing. The action happened in past time in the aorist indicative, but the kind of action is ongoing, was loosing. It was happening over a period of time versus the aorist tense, which in the indicative would just be he loose. The action is viewed as a whole in past time. It's not ongoing, it's simple, and we have depicted it often this way, as sort of a dot. The action is viewed in its entirety. So as to the formation of the subjunctive, remember the key thing to recognizing the subjunctive is what? That's exactly right. The long or lengthened connecting vowel, omega or eta. So we're going to see that in all of these different ways that the subjunctive is formed here. So as I've done for participles and as I've done for the infinitive and as I've done for the indicative, I'm going to give you a sort of list of all the different forms of the subjunctive and the different parts that make up those forms. And so we'll make brief comments just about a couple of these here. So remember, we only have the present tense and the aorist tense for the subjunctive. So our first one here is the present active subjunctive. We have the normal verb stem, not modified. We have our lengthened connecting vowel, which is our key to identification for the subjunctive. And then we have primary active endings, those endings that you had learned so well back when we did indicative verbs. The present middle or passive. So here, remember, when we have a slash between middle and passive, it means they are going to look exactly the same. The present middle subjunctive is going to look identical to the present passive subjunctive. And the only way you know whether it's middle or passive is based on the context of the sentence itself. Once again, we have an unaltered verb stem. We have that lengthened connecting vowel. And instead of the active endings, we have the primary middle endings for the present, middle, and passive subjunctive. We're going to have the second aorist active subjunctive is going to look very similar to the present active subjunctive. So we've seen this in a number of other moods as well, where the second aorist and the present look similar to one another. And the only difference is going to be the modified stem, is that the second aorist, remember, changes its stem. It's what's called a strong verb. It changes to a strong form of, or a different form of the verb altogether to form the aorist. So as a reminder, we do something similar in English where the verb go in the present changes to went in the past. So that changed stem, the modified stem, is going to be what indicates we have a second aorist, and then we have the lengthened connecting vowel with those primary active endings, just like in the present active subjunctive. For the second aorist middle subjunctive, again, all the same thing on this side. Over here, our last two items, as with the present middle and passive subjunctive, the only difference is that modified stem. For the first aorist, we get a little bit more changes and we get something that's a bit more recognizable and consistent. Because remember, a modified stem is going to look different depending on the verb. For the first aorist active subjunctive, we're going to get this sigma that is a sign to the aorist. And notice it's not a sigma alpha as it is in the indicative. It's just a sigma with those primary active endings. And so what you're going to see when we look at this paradigm is that many of these first aorist active subjunctive forms actually look a whole lot like what? Since we have a sigma there. That's right, the future indicative. There's going to be similar looking forms, and the only way you know whether it's a future indicative or a first aorist active subjunctive is by the context of the sentence, but also because we are often translating the subjunctive in a future way. Sometimes it's not going to matter all that much. The difference between the first aorist subjunctive with the sigma and the way that we would translate a future indicative is in some cases not going to be that different from one another. So same thing with our first aorist middle subjunctive. We have the sigma as our clue to the subjunctive. We have that lengthened connecting vowel, which is our key to identification for the subjunctive. And then we have the primary middle endings. The first aorist passive subjunctive is going to use the theta. So remember when we were in the indicative mood, the theta eta was a clue to the passive tense, or the passive voice, excuse me, in future time and in aorist time. And here with the subjunctive, the aorist is the only tense that is going to take the theta. So you will not see a theta for the passive with the present. Notice here that our present passive subjunctive is indicated by the middle endings, whereas the first aorist passive subjunctive is indicated by this theta with the primary active endings. And so this is going to be all of our the forms that we regularly see in Koine Greek, in the Greek of the New Testament, for the subjunctive. And the last thing I want to call your attention to is the fact that all of these aorist forms, so notice here we have 5 different aorist forms, and none of them take an augment. Remember, the augment only occurs in which mood? That's right, you nailed it, the indicative mood. The augment only is assigned to the past tense, that is the imperfect or the aorist in the indicative mood. Participles won't take augments, infinitives won't take augments, subjunctives won't take augments, and as we will see, imperatives also will not take augments. So we're moving now from our sort of list of the way that the subjunctive forms to actually looking at what they look like. So you'll notice here I give us how each different tense and voice of the subjunctive is formed, and then we'll have our different endings here. I give us these. So our primary active endings, o, ace, a, mente, usi. And this is what it looks like in the paradigm itself. So again, notice with this one, this looks exactly the same as the present active indicative first person singular. The only way that you'll be able to know whether it's subjunctive or indicative is based on the context of the sentence, and particularly on the way that the subjunctive functions. And we're going to talk about that towards the end of the video here. But some of these forms are going to be shared with other different tense, voice, and moods that you have already seen. But notice what's characteristic here is, and what's our key to identification to the subjunctive? That was a question. I didn't intone it as a question, but what is our key to the identification of the subjunctive? That's right, our lengthened connecting vowel. And so notice that in all of these, we have either an omega or an eta. And so some of these endings are going to look just as they do sort of in the bare endings that you have learned. But other times, particularly in the second person singular, and this is going to happen for many of our forms, this is where we get lots of changes. So what's happened here is our epsilon has lengthened to an eta. And then when the epsilon lengthens to an eta, it allows that iota right there to go under the eta, to subscript. A iota likes to subscript if it can. It sort of likes to hide itself under the long vowel. And that's what has happened here. And then the sigma at the ending. And then again, with the third person singular, the epsilon, when we had the lengthened connecting vowel, has gone to an eta, and the iota has hidden under the eta there. And then otherwise, we see the men, te, sin endings here. In this case, the u, the connecting diphthong there, has gone to the long omega. So our present middle subjunctive, remember our lengthened connecting vowels, our key to identification. We have the verb stem with that key to identification, and then those primary middle endings, my, si, tai, mitha, ste, ntai. And notice again, we have those on our endings here with the primary changes, or the sort of most different looking form in the second person singular here. And this again has to do with, in this case, some forms of contraction and the sigma actually dropping out, us getting the lengthened vowel, and then the iota going underneath the eta there. Otherwise, we can see my, tai, mitha, ste, ntai very clearly from our endings there. Two different forms of the subjunctive, our first aorist and our second aorist. In the active here, we have our primary active endings, once again, o, ace, a, mente, usi. And on the first aorist, we have the sigma as our sign to the first aorist. So this is not the sign to the future, even though this looks exactly like our future active indicative form. This is the same form is used for the first aorist active subjunctive, but in this case, the sigma is not a sigma as a sign to the future, it's a sigma as a sign to the subjunctive. Then otherwise, again, we have those endings added on afterwards with our lengthened connecting vowel in each case. So notice how everyone is either an omega or an eta. And then over here, for our second aorist active subjunctive, notice we have the short ball, ball with one lambda instead of two. If we had two lambdas, we would be working with the present tense stem, but this is our modified stem, then with those endings with the lengthened connecting vowel added on there. Our forms of the middle, sorry, not the middle active subjunctive, the aorist middle subjunctive, my apologies here. Let's just write it in. Aorist middle subjunctive. That will be fixed when you get the slides for this. So we have the first aorist built on the normal verb stem, the sigma added for the sign of the aorist, our lengthened connecting vowel is the key to identification for the subjunctive, and then those primary middle endings. The same thing with the second aorist, except the stem changes and we don't have the sigma there. So there's our endings, and this is what it looks like on the verbs themselves. Then, so here in the first aorist, we have that sigma with the lengthened connecting vowel and those endings. And then over here, we have the second aorist stem, ball, with a single lambda instead of two, our lengthened connecting vowel, and then those endings stuck on to the lengthened connecting vowel there. And last one, I believe, we have our first aorist passive. Remember, our theta is only going to be there for the aorist tense of the passive subjunctive. In the present passive subjunctive, we have those primary middle endings being the key to identification for the middle and the passive, whereas the theta here is our clue to the passive for the aorist passive subjunctive. So here are our primary active endings. We have then the theta with those endings added on with the lengthened connecting vowel. So these are all look familiar from all these paradigms that we have just previously had, with the theta added in there as our sign to the aorist passive. So, having presented and talked at you for over 15 minutes now, I am going to take a step back and let you pull some information out of your brain. Remember, you learn and you tend to remember more, not when you put information in, not when you jam information into your mind, but when you pull it out. The more we can pull that information out, the more likely you are to remember it. So based on what I've told you here, and perhaps based on your reading of the textbook, if you've already done that, let's go ahead and answer these 5 questions. So go ahead and pause the lecture. I'm going to do the same and write my answers down, and then we'll come back together here. All right, so here are our answers. Go ahead and take about 10 seconds to look over them before I talk through them. And let's go ahead and high five for your work, whether or not you got all of these right. 1, 2, 3, high five. Boom, way to go. As always, proud of you. Let's talk about each one of these really quickly. The key to recognizing the subjunctive is the lengthened connecting vowel, namely an omega or an eta. We're going to see this omega or this eta in all of the forms of the subjunctive. The tense and voice of the subjunctive that will have the theta before it is going to be our aorist passive. So the present passive is not going to use this theta. It's only going to appear in the aorist passive subjunctive. The subjunctive is oriented towards future time because it is the mood of possibility or probability or contingency. The action is not assured, but so it may or may not happen. That being the case, it's sort of future oriented. We're often going to translate with the English future tense word will. The tense of the subjunctive that will add a sigma before the lengthened connecting vowel and those endings is going to be the first aorist. The first aorist only, not the second aorist. The second aorist is going to change its stem. The sigma, when you see it in a subjunctive form, is going to be our sign to the first aorist. And then lastly, true or false, the aorist subjunctive will take an augment. This is false. The augment only occurs in which mood? That's right, in the indicative mood. All right, let's move on and talk about the 7 different uses of the subjunctive. So what I'm going to do is walk through each one of these and sort of what it means and what you'll see. I'm giving you a sort of chart, a sort of cheat sheet for how to parse the subjunctive, how to identify the functions of the subjunctive. And then we're going to look at 2 sample sentences where I give you the English translation and I'm going to ask you to identify which word is in the subjunctive and which function of the subjunctive we have. So we have 2 different categories of use for the subjunctive. One category of use is the independent use of the subjunctive. And this is where the subjunctive verb is itself the main verb in the sentence. That is, we don't need another verb in the sentence in the indicative to make the meaning of the sentence. So, for example, in the hortatory subjunctive, let us loose him. That let us loose would be all one word in the subjunctive mood, and then him would be our object of the sentence. So that would be a 2-word sentence in Greek, and that is a sentence that can stand on its own. It doesn't need anything else. So the subjunctive verb can be the main verb in a sentence. So that's what we mean when we're talking about independent uses. And as I just said, the hortatory subjunctive is going to be translated let us, and it's always going to be a first person plural subjunctive. So when you see a first person plural subjunctive, one of your main options is going to be the hortatory. And hortor in Latin means sort of encouragement. So it's an encouragement to do something. Let us. The deliberative subjunctive is going to be translated with a question, and you'll often see it punctuated with a question mark in a Greek sentence, and it's going to be asking a question. The person that is speaking or is writing is going to be deliberating about an idea or a question. So, shall we do whatever the verb is in the subjunctive, or shall I do whatever the verb is in the subjunctive? A subjunctive of prohibition is going to be the negative particle may with the aorist subjunctive. Remember, normally the indicative mood is negated by which negative particle? That's right, oo, like this. And normally the non-indicative moods are negated with the negative particle may. So that's what we have here with this subjunctive of prohibition. If you want to make a negative command in Greek, one of the main ways to do that is to use may, that negative particle, with a form of the aorist subjunctive to command do not verb. And notice how that's sort of future oriented. Do not do this action in the future. So one of the exceptions to this rule about may normally negating a non-indicative mood and oo negating verbs in the indicative mood is what's called emphatic negation with the subjunctive, where you have both oo and may and then an aorist subjunctive. So if you really, really want to say something will not or should not happen in Greek, you use two different negative particles, Whereas in English, two negatives would sort of cancel each other out and make a positive. That's not the case in Greek. Greek likes to be repetitive in some respects, and so sort of piling on multiple negative particles is a way to really emphasize that action should not happen. So may plus the aorist subjunctive is going to be certainly I will not, you will not, they will not. It's a strong way to negate a sentence in Greek. So our other main category of uses of the subjunctive are what are called dependent uses. That is, they depend on something else in the sentence to make their meaning. So dependent uses of the subjunctive will not be the main verb in a sentence. So whereas these ones can stand on their own as the main verb in a clause or the main verb in a sentence, these ones cannot be the main verb in the sentence. There will usually be another clause in the sentence that has the main verb, which is normally going to be in the indicative mood. So the three different uses that are dependent on something else in the sentence. The first is purpose clauses, and there's two different forms of this. One with hina and one with hapos. And we've learned in the vocabulary, we learn these both as so that or in order that. And then the subjunctive will follow them, indicating the purpose for which an action happens. The second function of the dependent use of the subjunctive is in an indefinite clause. And the form of this is going to be a relative, namely a relative pronoun with that contingent particle on, which often means ever. So you can think of this as whoever plus the subjunctive, which is going to be your verb. So who, which, whatever does the action of the verb. Who, which, whatever loosens. And then lastly, we'll see the conjunction often used in conditional sentences with a on. So this a on here is a combination of a, which you have learned previously as the word if, a contingent particle, if this happens, with this form on that you normally see, or you will often see with the subjunctive mood. So this is a combination. A-on is a combination of a and on. And so when you see a-on with the subjunctive in what is called the protasis, in the beginning, the first half of a sentence, you're going to translate it if the verb of the subjunctive, then, and then there's going to be another verb in here that could be in a variety of different tenses, voices, and moods. So here is this chart I have given you. I've also given you it on the course Moodle page, not on a black background, so that you can print it off and have handy reference to it. And what I want to do here is take this chart and get a little bit of practice identifying the different forms of the subjunctive. So here we are doing identification, whereas when you go to the homework, you'll be doing more of the sort of pulling this information out on your own, doing the translation. So rather than looking at a sentence and identifying which function you have for the homework, you will be looking at a Greek sentence and translating, making a choice and translating for the different functions of the subjunctive here. So we're sort of scaffolding what you're going to do. This task here is going to be a little bit easier than what you will do in the homework, which will be a little bit harder. So it would behoove you to stick around for just a few minutes here and get a little bit of practice identifying the subjunctives. And we're going to make a couple other comments on these sentences as well. So I've given you here in Greek and in English, the English translation, the sentence along with two questions. So what I want you to do is go ahead and pause the video, look at your screen, and identify the two different subjunctive verbs in the sentence, and then identify what function they have based on both the English translation, but also based on this chart over here. If you can look to the chart first before sort of basing your decision off of the English translation, that's all the better, but that's not necessary at this point because we were just doing the practice of identification. All right, so our two subjunctive verbs, both of which are going to be indicated by that long connecting vowel omega. And these are our only two verbs in the sentence. So notice how this one in this clause, the top line is an entire clause, is a dependent use. This sentence could stand on its own without anything else. This one could not. This is a dependent clause. Independent clause up here, dependent clause down here. So synagogomen is going to be our let us gather word right here. And I know this is a vocabulary word that you have not learned. It's from synago, which is where we also get the Greek noun synagoge, synagogue, of course, a gathering. So this is going to be the hortatory use of the subjunctive. Notice how it's first person plural here, that men ending. So let us gather the people in the temple. That could stand on as its own as a sentence. This is a independent clause that could exist on its own without this. This, on the other hand, needs something else. It needs this up here to make sense because it means in order that we might be exhorted through the writing. So this sentence can't stand on its own. In order that we might be exhorted through the scriptures needs something else to make sense, to be completely full as to its meaning. So what we have here is a purpose clause. Notice we have our henna. So henna plus the subjunctive. And notice how Greek has sort of can interrupt. It can take two things that go together and stick something in between this. This happens, as you've already seen, quite often in Greek because word order is more flexible in Greek than it is in English. So that literally we have in order that through the scriptures we might be exhorted. And so notice one thing I want to call attention to here is this theta in there. This is our clue to what? What does this theta in combination with the long connecting vowel tell us? That's right, that we have an aorist passive. So the action is happening to us. We might be exhorted. So notice that be exhorted gets the passive sense. The action is happening to us. And the might or the will, we could translate it sort of either way, in order that we will be exhorted or in order that we might be exhorted. Both get at the future contingent nature of the subjunctive. So the subjunctive gets that might or that will in there, whereas the passive from the theta gets the action happening to us. So this is right here, our subjunctive. And my last comment is that when I mark a Greek sentence with a subjunctive in it, I normally do it with this squiggly line. For some reason, the squiggly line indicates more contingency to me, or possibility, and it suggests that something's not necessarily the case, as does, the hard straight line, which, makes an exclamation that something is actually the case. So if you are marking sentences as I do when you do your homework, I just let you know that's how I do it. You can, of course, mimic or not mimic my own practices. All right, one more example here, and I know we have another verb that you have not learned. This is from peno, which means peno means I drink. So once again, go ahead and pause the lecture, look at the screen, identify the subjunctive verbs, and also maybe while you're at it, see if you can identify the infinitive verbs in the sentence, and then also the functions of the subjunctive here. All right, so what we have here are two subjunctive verbs, are again both indicated by the long connecting vowel omega. Both of these are also going to be first person plural. This one a present middle subjunctive, first person plural. This one a present active subjunctive, first person plural. And so the first comment I want to make is why this one is in the middle. And see if you can make a guess about why we have dunometha in the middle here. That's right, it's because it is a middle deponent verb. So if you were to look this up in the dictionary, you would look up dunamai, and that my ending is telling you it's a middle deponent verb. And remember, remind me, what does a deponent verb mean? That's right, a deponent verb is going to take a middle or passive form, but be active in meaning. So the reason I call attention to this is because a verb that is middle in the present indicative is also going to be middle in the present subjunctive. So just because it changes moods doesn't mean it changes the fact that it's middle deponent there. So I said that slightly wrong. I said a verb that is middle in the present indicative is going to be middle in the present subjunctive. What I meant to say was a verb that is deponent in the indicative will also be deponent in the subjunctive. So that's why we have the middle ending metha here rather than an active ending with min, because this is a middle deponent verb in the subjunctive just as it is in the indicative. So what we have with respect to our uses of the subjunctive with penomen, notice what our sentence ends with here. The punctuation mark is a question, as it is in English. So we have a deliberative subjunctive, a first person singular or plural, in this case, subject, in the subjunctive. Is going to be shall I or shall we. So shall we drink oinon, wine? So this is going to be our object of the sentence. If we're marking it, I would circle it. Until ever. So remember, this gives contingency, or until the point to which may, remember the non-indicative moods are going to be negated with may rather than u, until whenever not we are able. Until we are not able. And then our two infinitives are going to be peripatein and lalein, so that we are neither able to walk nor to speak. And so this one is a little bit trickier as to the functions of the subjunctive here, because this is actually sort of a not entirely rare, but a rarer case where we have a sort of whenever, until ever. We would do this sort of as whenever, or until we are not able, but it falls into the indefinite clause here. We don't have a relative pronoun here, but we do have the relative sense of heos being sort of until, and then with the on, we get that indefiniteness. So if you had trouble identifying the function of this one, that's quite all right. It's because it was a little bit of a sort of trick question here. And the purpose of that is for you to sort of hopefully be able to identify which ones it was not. So sort of by a process of elimination, you might have come to this one here. And then the last thing that I want to note for you is that we have these two infinitives, until we are not able to walk nor to speak. Notice that these are completing the idea of the subjunctive verb dunometha. So to walk and to speak, they're depending on dunometha, and dunometha needs something to complete its meaning. Until we are not able, you need to something. And that's why we have what kind of infinitive here. If we're thinking about our functions of the subjunctive, remember back to our functions of the infinitive. What's our function of the infinitive that completes the idea of another verb? That's right, the complementary infinitive. So it takes its name from the fact that it completes something. So two complementary infinitives closing out the sentence and complementing or completing the verbal idea of dunometha. And so the last thing to note here is the answer to this question is, of course, no, we shall not drink wine until we are not able to walk or speak.